Good morning, dear students and friends. Today we are going to discuss an introduction to post-colonialism, post-colonial theory, and post-colonial literature. Now let us go to answer some questions. Where does it come from? Post-colonial literature comes from Britain's former colonies in the Caribbean, Africa, and India. Many post-colonial writers write in English and focus on common themes such as the struggle for independence, immigration, national identity, allegiance, and childhood. Next, what is post-colonial theory? Post-colonial theory is a literary theory or critical approach that deals with literature produced in countries that were once or are now colonies of other countries. It may also deal with literature written in or by citizens of colonizing countries that takes colonies or their peoples as its subject matter. The theory is based around concepts of otherness and resistance. Postcolonial theory became part of the critical text box in the 1970s, and many practitioners credit Edward Said's book Orientalism as being the founding work. Typically, the proponents of the theory examines the ways in which writers from colonized countries attempt to articulate and even celebrate their cultural identities and reclaim them from the colonizers. They also examine ways in which the literature of the colonized as inferior, which they also examine the ways in which the literature of the colonized powers is used to justify colonialism through the perpetuation of images of the colonized as inferior. However, attempts at coming up with a single definition of post-colonial theory have proved controversial, and some writers have strongly critiqued the whole concept. Some issues in post-colonial theory. Post-colonial theory deals with the reading and writing of literature written in previously or currently colonized countries, or literature written in colonizing countries which deals with colonization or colonized peoples. It focuses particularly on the way in which literature by the colonizing culture distorts the experience and realities and inscribes the inferiority of the colonized people on literature by colonized peoples, which attempts to articulate their identity and reclaim their past in the face of the past's inevitable otherness. It can also deal with the way in which literature in colonizing countries appropriates the language, images, scenes, traditions, and so forth of colonized countries. This page addresses some of the complexities of the post-colonial situation in terms of the writing and reading situation of the colonized people and of the colonizing colonized people and of the colonized people. The literature of the colonized post-colonial theory is built in large part around the concept of otherness. There are, however, problems with or complexities to the concept of otherness. For instance, otherness includes doubleness, both identity and differences, so that every other, every different than and excluded by is dialectically created and includes the values and meaning of the colonizing culture, even as it rejects its power to define. The Western concept of the Oriental is based. The Western concept of the Oriental is based, as Abdul Jan Muhammad argues, on the Manichaean allegory, seeing the world as divided into mutually excluding opposites. If the West is ordered, rational, masculine, good, then the Orient is chaotic, irrational, feminine, evil. Some simply to reverse this polarizing is to be complicit in its totalizing and identity destroying power. Colonized peoples are highly diverse in their nature and in their traditions, and as beings in cultures, they are both constructed and changing, so that while they may be other from the colonizers, they are also different one from another and from their own pasts, and should not be totalized or essentialized through such concept as black consciousness, Indian soul, Aboriginal culture, and so forth. This totalization and essentialization is often a form of nostalgia, which has its inspiration more in the thought of the colonizers than of the colonized, and it serves give the colonizer a sense of the unity of his culture while mystifying that of others. As John Frau remarks, it is a making of a mythical one out of many. The colonized peoples will also be other than their pasts, which can be reclaimed but never reconstituted, and so must be revisited and realized in partial, fragmented ways. You can't go home again. Post-colonial theory is also built around the concept of resistance as subversion or opposition or mimicry, but with the haunting problem that resistance always inscribes the resisted into the texture of the resisting. It is a two-edged sword as well. The concept of resistance carries with it or can carry with it ideas about human freedom, liberty, identity, individuality, etc., which ideas may not have been held or held in the same way in the colonized culture's view of humankind. On a simple political, cultural level, there are problems with the fact that to produce a literature which helps to reconstitute the identity of the colonized one may have to function in at every least the means of production of the colonizers. The writing, publishing, advertising, and production of the books, for instance. These may will require a centralized economic and cultural system, which is ultimately either a Western import or a hybrid form, uniting local conceptions with Western conceptions. The concept of producing a national or cultural literature is, in most cases, a concept foreign to the traditions of the colonized peoples, who had no literature as as it is conceived in the Western traditions, or in fact no literature or writing at all, and did not see art as having the same function as constructing and defining cultural identity, and were like the peoples of the West Indies, transported into a wholly different geographical, political, economic, cultural world. It is always a changed, a reclaimed but hybrid identity, which is created or called forth by the colonizers' attempt to constitute and represent identity. Hybridity is equal to mixing of cultures, X double consciousness. One goes to an American university and gets educated, then returns to native land only to find that he or she cannot identify with the culture anymore. The very concept of nationality and identity may be difficult to conceive or convey in the cultural traditions of colonized peoples. There are complexities and perplexities around the difficulty of conceiving how a colonized country can reclaim or reconstitute its identity in a language that is now but was not in its own language, and genres which are now but were not the genres of the colonized. One result is that the literature may be written in the style of speech of the inhabitants of a particular colonized people or area, whose language use does not read like standard English, or in which literature the standard literary allusion and common metaphors and symbols may be inappropriate or may be replaced by allusion and tropes which are alien to British culture and uses. It can become very difficult then for others to recognize or respect the work as literature. There are other times when the violations of the aesthetic norms of Western literature is inevitable, as colonized writers search to encounter their culture's ancient yet transformed heritage, and as they attempt to deal with problems of social order and meaning so pressing that the normal aesthetics transformations of Western high literature are not relevant, make no sense. The idea that good or high literature may be irrelevant and misplaced at a point in a culture's history, and therefore for a particular cultural usage not be good literature at all, is difficult for us who are raised in the culture whose strong aesthetic ideals to accept. The development of hybrid and reclaimed cultures in colonized countries is uneven, disparate, and might defy those notions of order and common sense, which may be central not only to Western thinking but to literary forms and traditions produced through Western thought. The term hybrid used above refers to the concept of hybridity, an attempt, an important concept in post-colonial theory, referring to the integration of cultural science and practices from the colonizing and the colonized cultures. Integration may be too orderly a word to represent the variety of stratagem, desperate or cunning or good-willed, by which people adapt themselves to the necessities and the opportunities of more or less oppressive or invasive cultural impositions, live into alien cultural patterns through their own structure of understanding, thus producing something familiar but new. The assimilation and adaptation of cultural practices, the cross fertilization of cultures, can be seen as positive, enriching, and dynamic, as well as oppressive. Hybridity. Hybridity is also a useful concept for helping to break down the false sense that colonized cultures or colonizing cultures for the matter are monolithic or have essential unchanging features. To quote Homike Bhava on the complex issue of representation and meaning from his article in Greenblatt and Guns Redrawing the Boundaries, culture as a strategy of survival is both transnational and translational. It is a transnational because contemporary post-colonial discourses are rooted in specific histories of cultural displacement, whether they are all they are the middle passage of slavery and indenture, the voice out of the civilizing mission, the fraught accommodation of third world migration to the West after the Second World War, or the traffic of economic and political refugees within and outside the third world. Culture is transitional because such special histories, displacement, now accompanied by territorial ambitions of global media technologies, make the question of how culture signifies or what is signified by culture a rather complex issue. It becomes crucial to distinguish between the semblance and similitude of the symbols across diverse cultural experiences, literature, art, music, ritual, life, death, and the social specificity of each of these productions of meaning as they circulate as science within specific contextual locations and social systems of value. The transnational dimensions of cultural transformation, migration, diaspora, the transnational dimension of the cultural transformation, migration, diaspora, cultures who have been spread forth. Egyptians moved to Jersey. They are not Americans, but they cannot go back to Egypt. They are not Egyptian Americans. This links to hybridity, which is usually a positive answer to differences. Displacement, relocation makes the process of cultural translation a complex form of signification. The natural unifying discourse of a nation. The literature of the colonist. In addition to the post-colonial literature of the colonized, There exists as well the post-colonial literature of the colonizers. As people of the British heritage moved into new landscape, established new founding national myth, and struggled to define their national literature against the forces and tradition of the British tradition. They themselves, although of British or European heritage, ultimately encountered the originating traditions of as other, a tradition and a writing to define oneself against or which amounts to the same thing or equal. Every colony had an emerging literature which was an imitation of but differed from the central British tradition, which articulated in local terms of myths and experience to a new culture, which expressed the new culture as to an extent divergent from or even opposite to the culture of the home or colonizing nation. The colonizers largely inhabited countries which absorbed the people of a number of other heritages and cultures through immigration, migration, and forced mingling of different local cultures. In this regard, a salient difference is between colonialist literature written by colonizers in the colonized country, on the model of the home country, and often for the home country as an audience, and post-colonial literature, is that colonialist literature is an attempt to replicate, continue, equal the original tradition, to write in accord with the British standards. Post-colonial literature is often, but not inevitably, self-consciously a literature of otherness and resistance, and is written out of the specific local experiences. Major post-colonial theorist Homike Bhabha, The Commitment to Theory, Edward W. Said, Orientalism, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, Can the Subaltern Speak? These are the main uh, major post-colonial theorists. Okay, thank you everybody.